right, chat. We're back. We are back. So, when we last left our rambling, we were talking about perfect balance. Now, I will say, I think perfect balance is possible. And the problem is, perfect balance isn't necessarily desirable from any angle. From the player angle, from the developer angle, and certainly not from the business angle. You just want to be balanced enough. I think that if we were on an infinite timeline, and we talked about this somewhat yesterday on stream, if you had all the time in the world both to play and to develop and all that fun stuff, things would fall into an equilibrium and then be balanced to some degree on their own. Additionally, if you had all the time in the world, you could achieve perfect balance by making minor tweaks and just never introducing any new variables into the closed environment. If you look at it as a science experiment, if it's a closed system and there's no outside forces, aka new set releases or anything like that, you could then just tweak all the things until you decide everything is 50-50 across the board. However, that end state may not be desirable because ultimately you could easily end up with a game that's not fun. Now, these are concepts that they sound very basic and probably sound kind of obvious, or maybe they just immediately grate on you like that can't be possible. Now, I don't think it's impossible for you to have a fun and interesting game that is perfectly balanced. But as I started out with, I don't think perfect balance is worth chasing in a lot of cases from a business perspective. We'll start there because it's an enormous amount of effort to accomplish something that may not ultimately make your audience all that happy because their favorite card got nerfed, their favorite strategy got banned, or the game is now bland because you've removed all of the fun and cool things that you can do in the name of balance. Additionally, I mean, that kind of informs why the players would. From a developer perspective, you can come up with creative answers, but you're not creating something new. You're just modifying existing things, which from a creative aspect is fun and interesting. But if that's all you're ever doing, you'd like to stretch your creative muscles in other avenues. And at the end of the day, because as a business, in order to keep the lights on, in order to ensure that you are able to continue producing cards, making sets, doing all this stuff, the format's just going to change anyway because you're releasing new sets. Now, that's not an excuse to just throw broken stuff out there or not make any attempt at balance. But ultimately, there's a point where there are diminishing returns on chasing that goal. I firmly believe that it is possible to perfectly balance basically any game. I mean, obviously, I don't know every game, so maybe there are some that it's impossible, but I think there are ways to achieve it. It's just stating up front what constitutes balance. Because if you're willing to accept some 90-10s because, this deck is a high-roll deck, high-risk, high-reward, well, that's technically balanced within the scope of the whole environment. It just may suck if you play that matchup. So it's setting those goals and then achieving them, I think, is possible. But is it possible with the resources available? I think it's impossible to have a perfectly balanced while still releasing new cards and still being fun. You can't have all three. I think you can, but it's much harder than people give it credit for, Slippy. So I think you're mostly right. The reason I say it's possible is I've absolutely played games where I'm like, this specific format right now, like this new set came in and then we played the crap out of it. It is fun and it's even. But if you ask other people, they're absolutely going to say, no, that game and that format sucks. So that's why I said it's all contingent on how are you defining the thing. So the balance piece of it is just, like, we can all agree we'd rather play a balanced game for the most part than a super unbalanced one for the most part, because sometimes it's fun to do one or the other, and it may even change person to person, minute to minute. But if we're talking competitive scene, obviously that is a different driver, and again goes back to just setting the rules at the beginning. But I absolutely agree. If you're going to make new stuff, it's such a complex thing. You can't do it quickly enough in the business sense. Like, yes, it could be done, but are they going to hire 700 people to play test this stuff and then the additional people to manage the 700? Because it's like, okay, you played a bunch of games, but this group of 50 completely disagrees with this group of 50 on which things and what to do. How do you judge which is better? And then it's just going to, again, go back to time and money. But it could be impossible things like bloatability, since set of possible costs doesn't have enough range. It depends on whether they're willing to expand that range or tack on additional penalties and things like that. Like, increasing the costs or modifying the costs, of course, aren't the only ways to balance things. They've obviously reworked abilities, and similarly in Gwent, like, just changing provisions or power levels aren't the only things you could do. It's just, what are the rules that are there that you're allowed to do from the design perspective? I see what you're saying, though, since if you got 4 blood per turn, then the range of cost can be changed such that it's balanced. Yeah, it all depends on the scale. Like, we have to come up with what and not us, the players, it's the developers. When I say us or we, the rules just have to be defined of this is how we want our game to work, and then it's balanced within that sandbox, because otherwise you're just guessing randomly, or you're going to have things that are just wildly off the scales with respect to each other. I like unbalanced. Well, everybody likes doing that until you've played that sort of format for a while, because most people, and I say this as somebody who does like playing the same thing almost all the time, like virtually 100% of the time, I will play the same decks, the same games, and I wouldn't give them up if I didn't have to. But most people are not like that, and it's unlikely that you keep finding opponents if that continues, which ultimately is more important than my 90% win rate with insert deck. So rant over for now. I'm sure we'll circle back to it.